we live in a culture that literally worships at the altar of achievement. Like that is the mimetic desire, the most powerful manifestation of mimetic desire. And it's everywhere in our culture. It's on the social media. It's in our movies and our books. It's hard to escape from. There's nothing wrong with achievement. I really believe, great societies are based upon this idea of achievement and the pursuit of it. But you have to approach it carefully, because you can get caught up in a sort of unconscious pursuit of something that you may not even want. And that you could ruin your life, if you take it too far, or you could get to the end of your life and realize that you've made a bunch of mistakes because you sacrificed all your personal relationships to pursue this success.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Flow Over Fear podcast, where it is our mission to help you to rise above fear and realize your ultimate potential in leadership and life. I'm your host, Adam Hill, and it is my goal to share with you the human side of high performance. My guests share their experience with fear, anxiety, struggle, challenge, and most importantly, despite all of it, how they rose above it to achieve incredible results. So, if you're ready to rise up, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Flow Over Fear. Really excited that you're here today, because we're going to kind of dig into some ideas of success and finance and becoming a real impactful citizen. And, with regard to finance, there's a lot of ways in which our fears are anchored in terms of money. And a lot of that is rooted in uncertainty towards the future, in terms of our self-doubt or our beliefs in what we can achieve and things like that. And our guest today is going to help navigate some of those fears and help us to elevate above that. And we're going to have a great discussion today. So glad you're here. His name is Nick Halaris, and he is a multi-8-figure entrepreneur. He's the founder of Metros Capital, a leading real estate firm and creator of the Profit Plus platform, a media company focused on helping individuals find fulfillment and financial success. Nick is also the host of the Nick Halaris Show, a weekly podcast exploring the road to impactful citizenship, where he dives into powerful ideas at the crossroads of entrepreneurship, finance, and politics to help redefine success. Now, throughout his 17-year trajectory, Nick has not only built multiple 8-figure enterprises, but has also invested significantly in real estate, provided guidance to top-tier executives within Fortune 500 companies, and collaborated with numerous leading brands, and consistently contributed his insights to various prominent media platforms. Nick, thanks so much for being here. That is quite a resume.
Adam, well, thank you very much for having me, and for such a nice intro. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, I think it goes without saying, especially within where we're at in our society today, that there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of concerns around finance, where we're going in the economy and things like that. And I would love to dig into that, but I'd first want to kind of get into how you got your start. What was your upbringing? How did you get to becoming a multi-8-figure entrepreneur?
Yeah. How much time do we have? No, kidding.
As much as you like. People can listen to this at 2 times speed too, so we could rush through all that.
We got that.
Yeah.
Yeah, without giving a super lengthy answer, I was born and raised in the suburbs of Detroit. My mom was an American and my father was an immigrant from Greece, and grew up there. Had a fantastic upbringing, parents. Lucky to have just great parents and family. And I realized what kind of advantage that is, because in our society, that's not a given. And so I was blessed as a young person to come from a very good family, and it set me off on the right track. And, we'll get into this more later, maybe when we talk about fear, but I was really good at school. And school is about getting the right answer. And so I was good at taking tests and getting the right answer. And so that led me to Michigan, and then ultimately to Stanford Law School. And then when I was in law school, I realized that I didn't really want to be a lawyer. I just wasn't passionate about the idea of either doing litigation or representing companies trying to do transactions. So I tried some other things. I did strategy consulting for like 5 years. I had a really good mentor who had a small firm, and he brought me on, took a risk on me. And I really learned a lot. Like that was a formative experience, because when you're 25 years old and you're supposed to like give advice to a senior executive at a Fortune 500 company, it's kind of a crazy setup. But I realized shortly into that experience, kind of like with law school, that, man, I don't want to do that either, because I wasn't passionate about it. So eventually I answered the call that I was really feeling and got into being an entrepreneur. And at the time, the real estate market had crashed. So I said, oh, maybe we should go look at real estate. And long story short, been doing that ever since. And recently, in the last several years, have decided to continue to pursue my career as an entrepreneur, but also to give back. I think that's kind of the main motivation for this creative work. I feel compelled to do it, and I like doing it. And I'm going to, see where it goes.
That's so great. Yeah. And in looking through, your content, there's a lot of that, especially that, with the Profit First, or the Profit Plus, platform and all of that you have going on. It's with an eye towards contribution. And I love that aspect. Does that have any kind of root in how you came up with your, or what lit that fire just to want to be more of a contributor?
Yeah, I think for sure, my upbringing, I had parents who were not super religious, but they had been raised in religious households. And so they had this sort of moral bedrock. And I watched my mom in particular. My mom was a big civic activist growing up. And so I learned from that powerful example about, not only why it's important, but what good can come from it. Because, not only are you making a contribution to your society, but you also sort of improve your life. You get new friendships and new relationships and new experiences. So like I saw that all kind of through my mom's activity. Yeah. And as long as I can remember, I sort of felt this responsibility. I don't really know where it came from, but I remember feeling it even as like a young kid, where if things were happening, in my world that didn't seem right, like I sort of felt responsible. And I remember actually I was named, maybe it's a result of this. When I was in 4th grade, we had a safety squad. And essentially the safety squad was like responsible for making sure people didn't like get hurt when they were getting on the bus or crossing the street going to school. And the gym teacher who I was close with, Mr. Preston Ninzi, I'll never forget him. He liked me and he named me the captain of the safety squad. And so that experience was really formative for me, because I was so young and I really took it in. Like I loved being captain. I loved that feeling of leadership and responsibility, and sort of that stayed with me my whole life, really, even up to this day.
I love that. That's amazing. I love that backstory. And I like that story where you're learning that leadership and that kind of civic pride with your school and in that powerful way. And when we look at how that looks today, and because I want to dig into that a little bit, because one of the ways in which you give back is kind of helping people to become better citizens and all of that. So what does that mean to you, especially in this world where we're so polarized, where we're seeing so much on both ends, and it's just constantly this, us against them kind of mentality. What does looking like a good citizen, or how does that look to you in how we should operate?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have a pretty expansive definition for citizenship. There's this famous quote from Aristotle, and it's been used by other people, about how humans are political animals. And my response to that is like, if that's true, then our highest calling is citizenship. So if we are political animals, and then what we're meant to do is be citizens. And citizenship doesn't mean the same thing for every individual, but it sort of has everybody's life as a citizenship, in my view, is sort of defined by 3 major buckets or 3 major pillars. One is your personal growth and your personal development. 2 is your financial life. We live in a time where you can't ignore financial life, and you have financial responsibilities as a citizen. And 3 is impact. And so my view on what makes a good citizen is someone who's making progress at all times in all 3 of those areas. So you really have to. You can't be an effective citizen if you don't have your house in order. And having your house in order is, growing as an individual, learning new things, overcoming the challenges that get put in front of you. And a big part of the journey of citizenship is what you would find in sort of the traditional self-help genre. So you've got to get serious about that, especially when you're in your 20s and 30s. It's time to do some serious, deep work. But that's not enough. And one of the things that I started this Profit Plus newsletter and the podcast was because I felt like our culture was overemphasizing that particular channel for development. And people were pursuing self-improvement sort of ad nauseum and with no outcome or no end, right? Like how far can you optimize yourself?
Right.
And before it becomes sort of a do loop, like you're just constantly improving and trying new things. And you're actually not improving your life because you're missing out on sort of the next step. And my vision for what the next step is that at some point you have to accept a greater responsibility. And this can mean many, many different things. So for me, it's manifested in things like being a father and being very civically involved because that's what I care about. That's what I'm passionate about, but that's not true for everybody. So I don't want to have a narrow definition for what this responsibility is, but it's important. And then once you sort of make that leap of faith, everything else you do should be informed by that intentionality. So you don't pursue money just to have more money. You pursue money to have an impact. And that's the switch in people's mind that I'm trying to get people to make. You don't pursue self-improvement so that you live an uber optimized life and you're doing things for yourself. You do it so that you can make a contribution to your community. And it doesn't matter it matters what that contribution is, but that should be the focus and in the intentionality. So that's sort of a high level overview of the mission.
Yeah, no, that's great. I want to kind of dig in on a couple of those because it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that personal growth, financial life, and impact, it seems like those kind of feed into each other. So you have the personal growth, which leads to hopefully, a better, more successful financial life that with that and with those resources, with that abundance you can make a greater impact. Am I on the right track with that?
I think so. Yeah. The pathway, like in our culture, certainly that's the pathway that is being advertised. So what you see, like the most common typology you see for someone who's pursued success and actually achieved it is you do some personal improvement work when you're young, you pursue financial success, you get it, you realize that financial success on its own is not like the path to a fulfilling life. And so you start looking to do other things. You start giving money away in charity. We have high profile examples of this, like, extreme case would be Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, right? Like they make these massive fortunes and they're like, oh man, what am I going to do with all this money? And so they just give it away. And there's a real value to that. But that doesn't have to be the trajectory. So you can start adopting the intentionality of a citizen at any point in your life, as long as you've done like sort of a baseline level of personal development work where you really know yourself, then you can start having an impact along the way. And that's what I want to encourage young people to think about, which is that you don't have to go on this linear path where you take care of yourself, you make a bunch of money, and then you start taking care of your community. You can do it along the way. And my hypothesis is you'll probably end up in a better place if you do it that way, whereas if you do it in that sort of linear fashion.
Yeah, that's helpful. And it almost sounds like, just having a mindset more as a giver, not as a taker is that key to following through that path to a greater citizen or to becoming a better citizen. And kind of digging into that personal growth piece, you mentioned that, a lot of us fall into that trap of just like, continuing to do it for whatever the dopamine hit or whatever, but we're constantly immersed in it without really, it sounds like we're just not taking the action on it. So can you expand on that a little bit and how better to approach that personal growth part of it? Yeah.
Look, we live in a culture that literally worships at the altar of achievement. Like that is the mimetic desire the most powerful manifestation of mimetic desire. And it's everywhere in our culture. It's on the social media. It's in our movies and our books. It's hard to escape from. And so young people, without the benefit of, like a strong moral teacher or something like that, they're like very vulnerable to just get caught up in the stream. I was caught up in it, for 30 something years of my life. It was like definitely pursuing success above all else. Fortunately I had good family, like I mentioned earlier. And so I had some kind of a background to protect me against the craziness of that desire. But that's not true of everyone. And you see these young people, like, for example, kind of in the crypto world, where they took that energy and they forecasted it out and said, you know what? All that matters is if I win. It doesn't matter how I win. If I can win big enough, I can be immune from anything. I can be immune from the law. And, it turned out that they were wrong, but that's how powerful this cult of achievement is. And part of what I'm trying to do with the Nick Halaris show and the newsletter is to help people take a step back from that, particularly young people, and understand that there's nothing wrong with achievement. I really believe, great societies are based upon this idea of achievement and the pursuit of it. But you have to approach it carefully, because you can get caught up in a sort of unconscious pursuit of something that you may not even want. And that you could ruin your life, if you take it too far, or you could get to the end of your life and realize that you've made a bunch of mistakes because you sacrificed all your personal relationships to pursue this success. And so I'm trying to encourage people to slow down and really do some deep work and understand why it is they're pursuing the personal growth that they're pursuing.
Yeah.
And try to get some consciousness into that process so that they don't become a victim of mimetic desire.
Yeah. No, it sounds like you may speak from a little bit of experience there. Were you a victim of that kind of that cycle? And did that happen in your own life where you reached like this level of achievement? And you're like, oh my gosh, this isn't the fulfillment that I thought it would be. I need something different. Is that kind of what shaped your trajectory?
Yeah, it did. I had, when I started the entrepreneurial journey, my goal was to get rich. And I wanted that, more than I prioritized that. That's what I was going after. And as a result of that sort of generalized desire that wasn't framed with any sort of reference, philosophical or ideological reference, I made some bad judgment calls. And these bad judgment calls about, maybe the people I was doing business with or the decisions I made in managing my business led me to a point in my career where I was sort of on the edge. It could have gone either way. I had lawsuits, I had partnership disputes, and the business was in a very precarious position. And thank God I worked out of it. And it was in the process of working out of it that I had this sort of awakening. And it's interesting. I sort of believe that that's how life works, actually, which is that you are presented with these exterior challenges to wake up and understand something that you need to learn. And I needed to learn all this stuff that I'm trying to now teach. And it was tough, but I don't regret it, because I would have never become the person I am without it.
I like that attitude. I've heard, it's one of the common themes that I hear from a lot of people who have achieved this level of fulfillment, let's call it that, rather than success, right? Like that have achieved this level of fulfillment is that they've gone through some kind of challenge or hardship or something that was almost a career or life breaker kind of thing. And they came out of it, but they say now that they don't have any regrets about it because the lessons that they learned. And so that's powerful. And I hope people listen to that, because that's one of the elements of just trying to find that flow over fear, is knowing that we're going to grow, we're going to adapt, we're going to transition, and we're going to fail multiple times. But that's not the end. That's not the end all be all. It's just what we learn from it. And it sounds like you learned a lot, and you're delivering a lot more value now. So
yeah, certainly trying to. I feel like it was a formative experience for me, and hopefully the messages that I'm sharing can help people. Maybe everyone's going to have their crisis, so they're not going to avoid having a crisis, but maybe it'll be a little bit different than mine.
Yeah. Yeah. So how would you suggest to someone just starting out, say, just graduating from college or even in college and uncertain of what they want to do, with regard to that personal growth pillar that you have, what would you suggest in terms of how they approach that at that beginning stage?
Yeah. This is another one, again, that's a very individualized thing because everyone's different. And so the personal growth evolution for each individual is very tailored. But there are some things that are, I think, very consistent that are worth talking about. So in my work, actually, just the last several years, just writing and even doing these podcast interviews, I've sort of noticed a trend amongst people who have successfully done that journey. Mm-hmm. And the trend is this: there's essentially two pathways that you can take in life that will, lead you in the right direction. The first one is the path of passion. And this is the common advice you hear in our culture of like, oh, do what you love, find your passion. And you know what? Like, there's actually some value to that. It's not always true because I think there's a lot of times where, you might be passionate about, playing Call of Duty, but like that's not the type of passion that we're talking about here. But
right.
Yeah, so you do have to have a little bit of discernment and you have to use your brain to understand like when the passion is an appropriate one to follow. But I've met so many people in my life now, I'm middle age, where the ones that at a young age followed their passion, they end up in a phenomenal place by the time they reach sort of my age, which is mid 40s. And the more courageous they are in following that passion, the more fulfillment they find. And so there is something absolutely to that path. But you have to be willing, depending on what that passion is, if you want to be an artist, for example, you have to be willing to accept what comes with that. So it's hard to say like, I want to pursue financial success and be an artist. That's not a bet you can really make. The probability of that happening is incredibly low, but so it depends on, you really have to think about what you want. And then the other one is the path of service. I've come across many people who have some kind of traumatic life experience, either growing up or right when they reach adulthood, or maybe even middle life. This can happen in middle life too, but that experience pushes them to engage, to orient their life around service. And by service, I mean helping people, giving back, taking responsibility. And the people who do that end up in a phenomenal place as well. The same kind of place as the people who pursue their passion. Yeah. Yeah. And so for young people, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just saying it's powerful. It's an incredible, I mean, just simplifying it into those two can help people. And I caught onto a word there that was courageous, that takes courage to follow either one of those paths, it sounds like, because there's this sense of you have to believe that it's possible for you or something along those lines.
Yeah, you do. You either, in the case of the passionate individual, it's sort of like you've got to have so much self-belief, so much self-confidence that you don't care that there's all this mimetic energy pulling you in another direction. Like get the big job or whatever the thing that is alluring on the other side, and you just chart your own course. And that's why we celebrate people who do that. We celebrate those people because we all know what they're doing. We know what that courage is, and we love it, and we want to emulate it, and we make movies about it and stuff like that. And then in the case of the people who get called to service, in my view, they feel something emotionally and spiritually that is like a leap of faith. And they say, you know what? I don't care that you all are pursuing money, for example. I'm going to pursue this because I feel something else inside of me. And it's equally courageous, but I think it comes from a slightly different place.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And that's, and so the path of service versus the path of passion. And obviously those kind of differentiate themselves from the path that you feel society maybe wants to draw you down to just get the job, to make the money, take the finances, to just constantly grow and seek riches for the sake of riches. Which does kind of get into the next piece of it, which is your financial life, that part of it. which is one of the in one of those three buckets that you're talking about. Can you kind of share what that looks like in terms of what we should be pursuing or what we should be striving for on that financial life? If we worked on the personal development, how do we approach that without falling into the trap of just wanting more and more and more money?
Yeah, great question. Let me close the loop on the personal development one, because I do think there's a couple things that young people should keep in mind that are kind of like universal. So just give some thoughts. Number one, I'm a huge believer that a regular routine of physical discipline is the easiest entryway into the path of self-improvement. And so I highly recommend young people to start an exercise routine. Pick something. I love CrossFit, but I've also found this with martial arts, but anything. It's huge. It's you can't underestimate how important it is to establish that very early, like in your 20s, if you haven't established it already, and keep it and don't give up on it no matter what's happening. Like prioritize it above, almost not above anything, but seriously prioritize. Do it every day.
100%.
Secondly, people like my wife, for example, she makes fun of me, but I'm a big believer that journaling is an incredible tool. I've been writing journals since I was in senior year in high school, and I've kept them all. And I actually keep them in like a safe in my house. And my wife makes fun of me because I don't really know why I'm keeping them, but I'm keeping them. And I've learned more about myself doing that than anything. And it's an incredible practice. I recommend people do it every single day because it's the best way to make sure that you're engaging in the world with conscious awareness. If you don't journal or you don't establish some kind of practice of introspection, it's just so easy to get caught up with, especially with the devices and all this algorithms, like you can really get caught up in unconscious compulsive activity, and it's dangerous. And then lastly, some kind of practice around controlling automatic thought. So I've done a lot of research on this, a lot of reading. I've read like every spiritual tradition in human history. And there's one consistency, which is that they all are basically saying that the enemy of a human is the automatic thinking that comes inside the brain. And so they've developed different ways of dealing with it, meditation being the most common, or prayer, or contemplation, or the mantra, repeating things over and over again. But you don't have to have a religious belief to do this. The point is to establish some kind of discipline where you're regularly trying to control the automatic thoughts that are coming in your brain so that you can establish a more and more awareness over what you're doing throughout the day. Because it's very powerful. Like if you really want to see how crazy you are, like pay attention to the thoughts that come in your head throughout the day as you're like standing in line at Starbucks or whatever. It's wild what can come up in that stuff. And if you pay attention to it.
Oh yeah. I'm so guilty of that. It's especially today. I mean, the more overwhelmed, we get, and the more overwhelmed I get, the more thoughts come into my head, and they are always just like battling and just banging around in my head. But man, I'm glad you stopped me on that, because those three ideas are just so powerful in terms of things as you say them. I was thinking back to my college years and thinking about how I wasn't doing these things and how I was falling into this vicious cycle of despair. Not saying that people who don't do these will fall into this vicious cycle of despair and anxiety and fear and all this kind of stuff. But I started that routine of physical discipline, like you're talking about, into my early 30s. And I started doing that journaling and that personal development piece into my 30s, which was well after, my young years. And there was such a dramatic difference that I always look back on that. And if there's any regrets that I do have, and I try not to have any, but it would be that I wish I started that stuff earlier. And so I think that's so important. So I appreciate you stopping me and relaying that and closing the loop on that.
Yeah.
That's really powerful.
It's incredibly powerful. And honestly, like, I try not to sort of forcibly intervene on anybody who's in a crisis mode in life. But if they are and they come to me for advice, that's honestly the first thing I'm telling people. because it's very transformative. Like if you can establish that routine of physical discipline, that can correct like a huge percentage of your psychological despair. Just that on its own, and then give you the foundation to fix whatever else is going on in your life. It's a really critical component. You can't underestimate it.
Yeah. I 100% agree. And I would add to it that, it also requires stopping any of the bad behaviors that you might be doing, like the really toxic, self-destructive behaviors. But so that you can fully change and make that transformation. So very, very, I really love that. So now kind of moving on to that financial life, what is it? So what should we be focusing on that front?
Yeah. So financial life it's a big topic because, as I mentioned earlier, we live in a very financially oriented culture. You need money to survive. You have a family, you need money to provide for them. But even if you don't, just to make it on your own. Now, of course, you could like give up money and move to Alaska, like, some of these people who are on TV, trying to survive, in the wild. Like that isn't an option, but that's always been an option. Like when you read these spiritual texts, you find examples of that throughout history of people saying, you know what, I'm not going to be involved in the sort of normal economic life. But if you don't do that, then you've got to reckon with the fact that you are going to have to provide income for yourself. And it's important that I think the first step is understanding how you're going to try to make your income. And that can take a long time to figure out, because I think this process of sort of self-awareness or self-knowledge takes like a decade maybe. And so in your 20s, you probably have to experiment, unless there's some lucky few people who figure out at 22, or let's say you're like a phenomenal athlete or something. And so you get channeled into an industry before that. But for the ordinary of us, we kind of have to experiment before we really know, because the economy is very complex and there are lots of different ways to make it. So being very thoughtful about that and actually thinking about the future is something that I recommend everybody do, because, going back to my own story, part of the things that turned me off of the things that I said no to, for example, like a career as a strategy consultant or a career as a lawyer, is that I forecasted out. I looked at, okay, let's say I do this for 30 years. Almost certainly I'll be incredibly financially successful. But I looked at the people who were in their 50s and they didn't look all that happy. They didn't look like they were loving life and enjoying it. They were working like crazy. And there's nothing wrong with hard work. I actually really like hard work, but it just didn't seem like the path that was right for me. And so I chose a different path. And I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And took me a while to figure out. I actually figured out after the fact of what I like about entrepreneurship. And it's what I value more than money when it comes to financial life is autonomy. That's what I was after. And that's not true of everyone. Some people are totally comfortable with the idea of working and not being autonomous and showing up for a job. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it's part of that self-knowledge. You got to know. You have to know where you stand on that line. Is autonomy more important to you than certainty? And if it is, then you should be an entrepreneur. But if it's not, then you shouldn't be an entrepreneur, because some people, they really stress out, where I have, a different relationship with financial security. And so it's important to spend a lot of time understanding where you fall on that sort of spectrum between being okay with not having a guaranteed income coming in, and then you can kind of play around with it. So that's probably the most important thing. And then secondly, you've got to, the sooner you establish a healthy relationship with money, the better. So back to what we were discussing earlier, you don't want to have this sort of, I need money for the sake of money attitude. You need to start thinking about it differently. You need to start thinking about it as soon as possible as like, this is a means to an end. Yeah, I need money for X, Y, and Z. I want to do X, Y, and Z, so I need money. Like, you just change the conversation rather than I just want to get rich, like I had when I was like 25 years old.
Right. So what is that? And what does that look like? A healthy relationship with money? How does that look? Because I see it very similarly to, say, our relationship with food. Where that could be unhealthy if we're not clear on what exactly we want, and being very clear, very, very, very specific on it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think the ultimate goal is that you would treat it in the same way you would treat food. I think that's a great analogy that you used, where you eat enough, and with money you earn enough. And so enough kind of depends a little bit on what you're trying to achieve. So if you had like grand ambitions to use your money to better the world, for example, you might want to make a lot of money. Or, if you have dreams, that you want to pursue that require money, then like sailing around the world or whatever, then that might inform a little bit about what enough means.
Right.
But that's a big part of it, is just establishing a sense of moderation with your respect to money. It doesn't mean you shouldn't want to earn a lot of money. I think it's okay to want to earn a lot of money and to pursue wealth if you have a reason for it. If you don't, then you should stop and rethink what you're doing.
Yeah. I think that's so important. It kind of goes back to the whole idea of what your purpose is, or what your path is. If it's a path for passion, if it's a path for service, if you have those are obviously, they seem more important than the end goal, which is just a lot of money, like a pile of Scrooge McDuck level money in a vat of safe that you can dive into, that I picture would be very painful, I guess. But it's so as far as where we're at now in our economic estate, I mean, there's still a lot of, even though it was well over a decade ago, 15 years at this point, the financial 2008 crisis is still somewhat fresh in a lot of people's minds. We're seeing, still some maybe what stabilized real estate, but very, very precarious, it seems like, in those areas. We're looking at the markets that are still at absolute highs, but we're talking about how they might collapse. What is your outlook on that, as far as how we should be looking at those markets and looking at what we should do?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right that there's a tremendous amount of fear and uncertainty out there with respect to where we stand economically. Households are afraid, individuals are afraid, the government itself is probably afraid of what the future might hold around the world. This is not just a US problem. And there are many reasons for that. It would take too long to sort of get into that, but we live in an era of unprecedented economic uncertainty. It's probably as scary, in my view, as it could be, because we have this sort of perfect storm. We got humongous debt loads across the world. They got worse actually after the Great Financial Crisis. So the Great Financial Crisis was fundamentally about excessive risk taking and over leveraged banking system. And what happened afterwards is that we essentially socialized all those losses, and the governments of the world became significantly more indebted. And then COVID came, and then they did it again. And so literally we just keep piling this debt on. And there's this sort of logic to the arithmetic of debt, which is like, you got to pay it. And the bigger it gets and the higher the interest rate goes, it gets higher and higher. And so everyone who studies it looks at the logic of it, and they get really scared. Like I've interviewed a number of really smart financial minds on the podcast recently, and there's a universal fear about the sustainability of the economic order, and the fear is based upon the debt and how do we deal with these debts. And then to make matters worse, we have this inflation, which is a byproduct maybe of central bank activism, or maybe COVID, or maybe both. But inflation is very problematic in a world where you have debt that needs to get repriced or reissued. So the U.S., for example, amazingly has to reissue a bunch of debt right now, and interest rates are terrible. So they got to pay more interest than had they done it during the COVID era when interest rates were zero. So it's a crazy uncertainty. And it makes the path of the individual even more difficult, because you're looking at this incredibly complex global picture and trying to position yourself financially in your household to be okay amidst all this chaos. And maybe there's no way to really be okay because the world is so uncertain, but it's worth trying.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it sounds like it comes down to courage. I mean, courage with knowledge, not just going out and on a whim, just investing in crypto or anything like that, right? But just some amount of courage with foresight or knowledge in some way. I mean, I look at the interest rates now and things like that, and obviously, this isn't a financial show or anything like that, and I'm not any kind of expert, but I look at them now where they're hovering around 7% or so, right? And I look at the historically low interest rates that we've had throughout history to kind of keep us from collapsing as an economy in the previous version of ourselves. But before that, when we were somewhat normalized, I remember that those interest rates were probably somewhere around there, right? I mean, so is it? Hearing the narrative of saying, well, interest rates are really high, is that really true? Or are we just getting back to some level of, is this the normalcy, or are we expecting something higher, or is this high for this day and age? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great point. And historically, where interest rates are today, they're not high. High interest rates historically are like double digits, like what happened in the early 1980s when we had another, trying to deal with another inflation scare.
Yeah.
The problem with interest rates today at where they're at is because there's so much debt. And so like we literally, I forget the exact numbers, but the debt load has like doubled or tripled, something crazy like that. And so if you have, that much more principal and you start calculating the interest on it, like the arithmetic gets really ugly. And that's why, people are out talking about how these rates are unsustainable. It's just, There's two things. There's the debt load, and then the fact that the asset prices have gone up as well. And so, for example, like housing is a great example. Housing is really expensive for two reasons. One, mortgage rates are 7.5%. And two, the median house in America went from $200,000 to $450,000 over a 2-year period. So it just got like more expensive. And there's many reasons why the house price went up. Like we kind of have a broken housing market in America, but it's a perfect storm actually for economic pain, to have house prices be where they're at and interest rates where they're at. It's going to make it very difficult for Americans to, especially young Americans. That's who's getting really screwed over here, is that young Americans are going to have to delay a big part of the American dream, and in many cases forego the American dream altogether. If you happen to be in like LA or New York, like, okay, you got $2 million to buy a house if you're 25, like not going to happen. Other parts of the country, slightly, you might have a chance, but it's getting harder and harder.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point. And I really appreciate that. I mean, so it sounds like A, there's a lot of uncertainty around our broader economy. B, there's not a lot we can do individually to control it. So, I mean, would you suggest that instead of kind of relying on that market or even participating in that is to take for the financial life is to just focus on what you can control, maybe align your financial goals with what your passion is or what your area of service is, and just try and build a business around it so that you can control that? Or, what are your thoughts, or what would your advice be there?
Yeah. I think the best case scenario for economic life or financial life is that you do this sort of necessary work on the personal side to understand how you want to make money and what you care about. And then money becomes a byproduct of what you do rather than what you're doing it for. So you kind of switch the mentality. And then you follow some really basic principles of financial discipline. Right? You make sure your inflows are greater than your outflows. You don't waste money on stupid things. And most importantly, maybe not most importantly, as important is you acquire assets. So one of the things that I really try to hammer home in my work, my creative work, is trying to help people understand the extent to which our system is geared towards the ownership of assets. That is the goal of capitalism. And you, as quickly as possible, like if you want to have a good capitalist existence, as quickly as possible, you need capital. That is the whole game. And so that's why you see things in our culture manifesting like the crypto craze. That's people responding to the truth of capitalism, which is that this is a great system if you end up on the owner ledger. You really want to be on the owner ledger, and it's not so great maybe if you aren't an owner. Then you're completely insecure, subject to the whims of managers and market forces and whatnot. So keep your house in order, inflows greater than outflows, and try to acquire as many assets as possible.
Wow, nice. I love that. It sounds simple, not always easy, but definitely something to maintain a lot of focus on. So I appreciate you kind of going down that rabbit hole a little bit with me. I know we could go way, way, way deep on that financial part, but I do want to get into the impact piece and kind of talk about that a little bit more too, because that is something that now you're focused on after building these businesses and transforming your life and your goals and all of that kind of stuff. You focused on this impact, and you're encouraging other people to do the same. So what is your philosophy around that part of it?
Yeah, it goes back to this work I did over the course of about a decade. For whatever reason, I've always been interested in sort of synthesis, so like finding the commonalities rather than distinction. And when I was in a crisis point in my life, I stumbled across a book that really sent me down a crazy rabbit hole. This book is called Passage Meditation by Eknath Easwaran. And it's the book that I most commonly like give away and reference in my writing. But Easwaran is a fascinating individual. He's from India, and he was one of the first teachers of meditation at Berkeley. And I think he was like 60s, 70s, and he had a meditation center in Northern California, and he wrote an enormous amount of stuff. But anyways, long story short, this book sent me down the rabbit hole of reading. He recommends essentially reading all of these original texts and mystical writings from all of the different great religious traditions, ancient and modern. And the synthesis is that they're all in some form or another advising us to look beyond the self and the ego. They have different phraseology for it, but the advice is the same. And they're like, to summarize or to paraphrase the synthesis, it's the path to the good life involves moving beyond the ego and learning how to live for the benefit of your community. And
wow.
Yeah, and it's everywhere, and you see these powerful examples, like Gandhi, Mother Teresa, but the message of Jesus is the same. The message of Buddha is the same. It's like you got to get over yourself, and getting over yourself doesn't mean that you don't do these things that we just spent the last little bit talking about. You actually have to build up a strong sense of self in order to effectively move beyond it and go to the next phase of your evolution. But the next phase is okay. You've got these talents, you've got these skills, you've got this self-knowledge. In our area, you've got money, let's say, or you've got a chance to, you have financial prosperity so that you can focus on more than just finances. The key mental step is to say, how can I orient my work every day so that I'm making a contribution to something greater than myself? And that can mean, it doesn't mean you have to quit your job or anything. Like you could totally stay in the same job or the same career, but it changes the way you think about it. So instead of just showing up to work and doing your job, you're mentoring the young people that are in your organization and trying to help them improve their lives and improve their trajectory within the corporation. Or you do some side work, or you engage in creative work like you do, Adam, where you try to put inspirational ideas and help people learn things that they need to learn. And so there's like a lot of ways to do this. And the key is to just try it, pick some and try it and then keep doing it.
Yeah. I love that. And I'll say that from and so the name of the book was Passage Meditation, and that's by Easwaran is the last name awesome. We'll have that in the show notes and I'm going to buy a copy right after this I'm really interested in that. And yeah, I mean, I'll say from my standpoint, I see you've taken the same kind of trajectory of moving from the business into more of an informational media kind of outlet, which is profit plus, to help people do these three things, which, are related to personal growth, financial life, and impact. And I'll say, I'm reading through a lot of your articles. They're just so well written. You're so well spoken, and the articles are so well written. I love reading through them. They're engaging, they're entertaining, and they're informative. You just have so much information in there. So I know that it'll help a lot of people, and the impact you're giving on that. And I felt the same way, just kind of working in the business I work in and doing this show complement each other, because it just helps me to not only learn a lot from people like you or from others, in the world that are doing amazing things and serving in such a unique way, but it helps me to get out of that ego space of I got to make this better. We got to make these targets. We got to do this. And instead just, to steal a Ted Lassoism, to help people just become the best versions of themselves on and off the field. Yeah. I love that approach.
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words, man. I appreciate the fact that you, one, had me on the show, and two, spent the time, and thank you.
Well, no, it's my pleasure. I think this has been hugely, hugely valuable. And if people do want to find you and connect with you, first of all, you have the Profit Plus platform. They can find you at nickhalaris.com. That's where they can find all of your resources. Is there anywhere else you'd like to send people, or any other handles that you have that you'd like to share with people?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not great at this, but I'm working on it. This is one of my improvement initiatives for my messaging. Is Twitter is at Nick Halaris. And then on all the podcast places you could go, just look for the Nick Halaris Show. We're on maybe episode 16 or 17. And Adam, I'm looking forward to having you on to dig into all the learnings you've had over the years doing Flow Over Fear, which I think is a great show. I've enjoyed listening to it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And I'm honored that you'd want to have me on, and I'll try to do my best at sharing the great financial insights that I have from, no, I'm just kidding. I do not have any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Nick, this has been awesome. And I know we can dig deep on a lot of these subjects, and I would love to at some point have you back, so maybe we could dig deeper and see where we're at from an economic standpoint, from an impact standpoint, and kind of dig deeper on some of these, because we've just scratched the surface, my man, and you're doing incredible things. You're so giving and so impactful. I love your message, my brother, and I hope you're successful with that. So thank you
so much, and I'd love to come again, and keep up the great work. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Nick. And to everyone else out there, thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Flow Over Fear podcast. If you'd like to learn more about getting into flow and learn the foundations of flow, I have a free video series on my website at www.adamcliffordhill.com called The Foundations of Flow. Feel free to go there and download it and start your journey to rising above fear and achieving greater flow in your life. And if you like this episode, and I'm guessing you did if you stuck around for this long, then please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, and you will receive notifications when I have new interviews, new recaps, and new trainings that pop up on YouTube. Thanks again for joining us.